Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello, my friends, and once again, I want to welcome you to a brand new episode of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Isn't this a great week? Amidst the chaos, some really cool things are happening right now over on jkcarlson.com. Leaders discovering their superpowers every day. I hope you too have had some awesomeness this week. On this episode of the podcast, I have invited a new friend of modern leadership, Kate Stalter, to join us. Kate is one of those financial gurus who just seems to know what's going on with the markets and the economy, and she is here to help us sort it out a bit. To tell the truth, I've been anticipating this interview because I have some specific questions that I want to ask her. But I get ahead of myself. Let me give you a short bio. Kate is a licensed investment advisor representative. It's a mouthful, I know. It just means she knows investments. She's the founder of Better Money Decisions, which is a fee-only investment advisory firm based out of Albuquerque, but they have offices in Santa Fe and Scottsdale. She's an investment columnist for Forbes, U.S. News and World Report, TheStreet.com, and Seeking Alpha. These are all names that we've heard of. And the host of America Talks Money podcast. Kate, it is so good to have you with us on the show. Let's talk some money.
Oh, absolutely, Jake. Thank you so much. Very happy to be here today.
Well, and I was mentioning to you in the pre-interview that I've been anticipating this interview, this chance to sit down and talk with you, because I think you bring an expertise that is really needed in the world and really needed to the listeners of this podcast, including the host of this podcast, because financial freedom, financial decision-making isn't something that starts at 65 when we retire, and it's not something that starts at 45. It's something that we need to be thinking about at all times and all stages in our life. And so before we jump into some of these questions that I have, did we miss anything about you in the intro?
Well, I was thinking about just in terms of what I've got going on here. I think I mentioned to you that I am working from home. We do that quite a bit. We do meet with clients locally in the 3 locations that you mentioned, and we have clients nationwide as well. I'm actually flying out to New York City in July to see some clients that we have out on the East Coast. But today, I'm very fortunate. I do get to work from my home office here in Albuquerque. Really feel very fortunate to be able to do this in this day and age. And that's nothing brilliant I did. I think it's just the era in which we live that allows that kind of thing to happen, Jake.
Well, and I think that we are redefining markets in a way that people didn't think it was possible. You mentioned in the pre-interview that you were working from home. And in my mind, I said, no, wait a minute. You're in investments. Aren't you surrounded by screens and computers and people and somebody running the tickets? But the world is changing. And as you mentioned that, my first thought was, how do you do it? How does somebody who is working in a field that is traditionally office-based, how do you make this decision to be able to set up your practice and set up your office to be able to work from home or work from the local community or anywhere?
And that's a great question. And it comes back to the way that we work today. So I love that little visual you have there about people running around, handing the tickets, yelling, sell, 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 buy, buy, buy. That is not how we work. We're very much geared towards what our clients need to, the return they need to generate, balanced with the risk level to achieve their goals. And this is very scientific. It's not something that I cooked up at any time. It's based on Nobel Prize winning research. It's a very, very kind of boring asset allocation strategy. I mean, like we tell clients, the investing, really, that's just some discipline, some managing your emotions. That's the easy part of it. Because if you just invest in stocks and bonds from around the world, allocated in a way that is designed for you, then we can scientifically manage that based on historical returns. You can really rely on a lot of data, and it's about not panicking. That's the biggest thing, is when people see maybe a few big down days in the market. I mean, we all know this feeling. You turn on the news, and the news anchors, who are, by the way, they're journalists. They're not investment advisors. and they're paid to panic and go crazy and make you worry. And when they're on there going crazy about what's happening in the market, the trick is turn it off. Don't listen to them. They don't know anything about your situation. Just to follow up on this for one more minute, one of the big value adds that we bring, Jake, is to help people with their financial planning. And I think everybody's heard that term lately, financial planner. Very, very different than the old school stockbroker, because we're not stockbrokers, by the way. We're called registered investment advisors. That's how the firm is legally structured. We are fiduciaries. We don't get any commissions for trading stocks, nothing like that. That's kind of the way it used to be. I mean, sort of the old cliche, right, about some guy calling you up and saying, "Hey, Jake, I think tech is going to be hot this quarter." Yeah, we don't do that. That's not us. We would sit down with you. For example, say you came in as a client, and we would sit down at the very beginning. We'd get to know you. We'd find out. So, hey, is this international travel? Is this something that's important to you and your family? Do you want to continue this? You're running a business. Where does that fit in? What do you hope to accomplish? We'd obviously talk to your spouse. We never just talk to one partner. We talk to both of them. That's been a big problem in this business, is that a lot of the old school brokers would only talk to the man of the household, which is that's horrifying to think you would leave out one spouse. So we kind of tend to do things in a very holistic way, using not just common sense, but a very humanistic approach, but then also overlaying this Nobel Prize winning research. So that's kind of the long answer to how I can work at home on several days, not always, but on several days, and not have to be worried about some panicked thing that happens to be in the news that day.
And so one of the things that I'm hearing you say, one of these shifts in the way the working style is it appears to me that the cliche or the historical belief of what your job is and what you do, dealing with the emotions and the quick decisions and the high pressure, is gone away. And what it's been replaced with is something that I think in almost every industry that we talk about, not just in financial services, but in every industry we talk about, and that is customer service. And it's your taking the time to understand what my needs, and of course my wife is involved, what our needs are, and then creating a plan that works best for us, and not just trying to sell us on a product or get us to do something that maybe isn't the best interest for us. So my question then comes at it, when you look at this, how does it scale when you talk with so many different people and so many different people have different plans and ideas? I may be wanting to travel. Some other person may be wanting retiring early. Some people need to send kids to school or get them married, pay for weddings. How does it scale when you're taking so much time and investing in individuals?
Yeah, everybody's situation is different. You're absolutely right about that. And your situation is different today than it was 20 years ago. And in 20 years from now, it'll be different. So, change is a constant. That is something. But the idea of how it scales, that's a really good question. I mean, we do have a number of people at the firm, so I don't have to be responsible for every single client. I have a business partner, Lorraine L., who has been in this business for many years and is just brilliant about solving really difficult, challenging problems for clients. She's just kind of seen a lot of different situations and is willing to do a deep dive into the research when necessary to solve a problem. We have a certified financial planner on staff. Her name is Susan Coe. I think a lot of people are familiar with the term CFP. And Susan worked at Vanguard, which is a big mutual fund ETF company. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know that. She worked there. They're actually out in Scottsdale. So she worked there for about 10 or 11 years before she joined us. We have a brand new advisor, Stephen Daney. We have a brilliant trader and asset allocator on staff. His name is Brian Hirone. So and we're adding more. We actually, we've got a woman in Scottsdale and Phoenix, actually, named Nancy Hetrick, who's an expert in divorce financial planning. So I think the answer is, Jake, that it's not sort of the way we scale this is we have a team approach, and it's very important that we match up clients with the right person for them. For example, Stephen Daney, who recently joined the firm, He has a really extensive background in kind of coaching and counseling people about their attitudes about money, maybe if they have too much debt, kind of helping them sort out perhaps childhood or parental issues that maybe people feel like they're not deserving of money. I mean, I think we're all kind of familiar with that, with those challenges. And Stephen is really an amazing person to introduce potential clients like that to. So that's really the issue of how it scales. Everybody's situation is different. We take that into account. And, one thing too is when you're onboarding a new client, and I think a lot of businesses are like this, when you bring on a new client, there's often a whole lot of work that goes in up front, and then it kind of calms down for a few months most of the time. And then, of course, we meet with people on a regular basis going forward, but a lot of times it's kind of the setting up in the early months is when there's a whole lot of client contact, and then it just ebbs and flows over the years. So it's not the case that we necessarily have to meet with somebody every day or every week.
And what I'm hearing you say that really makes sense to me, and this is how I would translate it to the other businesses and the other opportunities that the listeners have, and that is systems. You have a team and you have systems in place. And yeah, there's going to be times when things are a little bit busier, when the client contact is going to be a lot more heavy and necessary. But there's other times where you've put the right systems in place. You've set up the process to run itself and provide the service to the customers. And then at that point, it's just maintaining that positive relationship. And I think no matter what industry we look at, one of the things that we can do to really improve and to really drive towards success is to find those systems, those practices that we can put into place that will make success inevitable, and then put the right teammate around. Kate, one thing that you said that I found really interesting is you know your team so well. As we were talking, you knew which person would go towards which, somebody dealing with a divorce situation. We have the person that is an expert in that. And I think that's one of the main advantages that we have in this interconnected and growing global world that we have, where we can rely on the services and expertise. You can be in Albuquerque, but rely on the expertise of someone in Phoenix. And technology really offers that for us. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask you, another thing you talked about was emotions. And I'll give you just a quick, this is maybe a little confessional. I worked as a stockbroker for a year. I come from a stockbroking family. And so I have just enough knowledge about the stock market to be dangerous, not enough to be helpful. But one thing that we always talked about was the emotions of trading. Now, we were specifically stockbrokers, so we were specifically trading. And one of the things we talked about was no trading the first half hour of the market, no trading the last half hour, because that's when all the amateurs go in and get beat up. But I wanted to ask you about this emotional trading and how it can help us or hurt us in the philosophy that you and your practice represent.
Oh, it's huge. Absolutely. And for the record, my background before I got licensed, I worked at a company called Investors Business Daily for about 10 years, and I taught their stock trading seminars. And I did videos, so I was very heavily involved in that industry as well. And it's great background. I learned a lot. I don't regret any of it, even though I'm doing something totally different today. But, managing emotions, it's always an important part of any discussion about money. One example, and, in this day and age, as we all know, it's not a newsflash to anybody, with so much sort of contentious political bickering that goes on just every day in social media and on television, and unfortunately, even among friends and family, you have to sort of check your emotions and your political views at the door when you're investing. So let me just give you and I can cite both sides of this argument very easily because I see it on both sides. So back when President Obama was elected in 2008, a lot of conservatives were very, very nervous that he was going to do tremendous damage to the markets, and they bailed out. And, to be fair, people were already kind of nervous because of what had happened in 2007, 2008, 2009. And I think they were particularly shell-shocked at that point already. But over the course of the 8 years of the Obama administration, U.S. stock markets had a tremendous bull run. Now, let me hasten to add, with our new president who was inaugurated this year under President Trump, we also see that that bull rally is continuing. And you have, of course, Jake, the flip side. You have people who dislike the current president and don't trust him and feel like, well, I need to bail out. Now, fortunately, I think people kind of saw the lessons of the Obama administration and realized, oh, okay, regardless of how I feel about any given president, he's not the person who controls the market. He single-handedly, he doesn't wake up in the morning and say, okay, I think the S&P should do this today. So be it. There's so many different factors that go on that to kind of isolate one thing and to say, I'm going to panic about that, have an overreaction to this, that's very, very dangerous. So that's one example that I see a lot is people watching the news, getting upset about the political situation. And frankly, you have to separate that because presidents come and go. News of the day comes and goes. And over time, you have to think about what do you need over the course of your lifetime. We project a lifespan of 100 for everybody because more and more Americans are living to 100, particularly more women, by the way, but men too. And you have to kind of separate that out from what you might be scared about and think, okay, I need to use the science of investing, understand how returns are generated. And if I bail out and get scared or react, frankly, in the long run, that generally does more harm than good.
100.
100.
This is a huge number. And as I think about this, my background in tax law and trust and estates, I did a lot of studying about setting up people's retirement, setting up their wills and trusts and getting them ready to pass on. And of course, when we start talking about 100, one of the things that's interesting when Social Security and retirement were kind of set up, at that age of 65, the average lifespan for a worker was 62. And so if you got an opportunity to retire and then accept Social Security, you were living on borrowed time, bonus time. But now we look at this and we say, okay, now if I want to retire, and let's say I want to retire in my 60s, I've got maybe more years of retirement than I do working years. And so this is huge. And mitigating the growing longevity risk is something that I wanted to ask you about. And I want to talk to you about a specific question that I have. But before I do that, how does this mitigating this longevity risk, how does this play into this? Now we're starting to live to 100.
Yeah, it does require saving, planning for this. The biggest thing that kind of annoys me when I hear people talking about this is they say, well, my dad died at 68, so I don't have to worry about it. Well, wait a second. Talking about mitigating circumstances, I'll give you a little story that I heard from a person who never did become a client. This is at a firm where I used to work. He came in to talk to the firm and he was concerned about investing. He mentioned the fact that, like I said, his dad died at 68. That's where I got this from, or sometime in his 60s. Well, it turned out the father was working in some plant that had asbestos exposure back in the day. And he also smoked and didn't take care of himself. So, yeah, there were some extenuating circumstances there. So then in the next breath, the guy goes, oh, my mother is 92 and she's alive and well. I'm like, well, which data point are you going to pick? So it's this idea that we all, when you ask people how long do you expect to live, people immediately go to their genetics. And the insurance industry, over time, they've done some research into this because the insurance industry, as you can imagine, has a vested interest in this, in longevity.
Yeah, they do.
And they realized that, hey, you know what? Lifestyle is becoming more and more of a factor in how long you live, not so much your genetics. So if you think about that, so fewer people smoke today. We're talking about the United States right now. Fewer people smoke. We have tremendous strides that have been made in healthcare in recent decades, and that continues to happen. All our cars are outfitted with these safety features that they never used to be. So there are a whole lot of things going on that contribute to a longer life expectancy. So to sort of flash back to a parent's death in the 1970s is not necessarily the most accurate way to project one's own life expectancy.
And so if we know that, and if we believe what you're saying, which by the way, I absolutely do, and I think that we're going to quickly see 100 become a thing of the past, and it's exponentially going to grow from there because of the breakthroughs in technology and the medical field and all that. But if we accept that and we say, okay, I'm going to be living a long time, what do we need to do today to prepare ourselves for that? I mean, is there any reality is there a way that we can work during our 40 years of work and save for our 40 years of retirement?
Yeah, it's very fashionable today to say, oh, everybody's costs are so high and income is not rising. And how do I save? It may feel cathartic to sort of gripe about that, and I'm not saying you are. Maybe this is kind of what's fashionable today is to point out all the problems with saving. People can do that, but at the end of the day, if you wake up at 85 and you're broke, you're still broke at 85, and nobody ever looks back and says, yeah, I was right. I shouldn't have saved because I couldn't have. I'll tell you what we hear, Jake, is people saying, I wish I'd started this sooner. Because for everybody, there's always a way to cut out something from your life. And usually you don't even miss it. You hear these things about, well, maybe if you downgrade your cable service and stick that extra $20 into your retirement account, you're probably not going to miss the cable downgrade, for example. And when you are 85, you're going to be very happy that you did that in your 30s because the magic of compounding works for you. Now, this other thing that sometimes people shrug their shoulders and say is, oh, my kids will take care of me. Well, that's not fair. And honestly, when you really do ask people about that, they don't want to be a burden on their kids, particularly women. Men too. But again, we kind of have this longevity discussion with a lot of women, a lot of our clients, because we are a woman-owned firm. We have fantastic male and female clients, but we do work with a lot of women, and they often say that's one of the first things. They'll be looking at long-term care insurance, for example, which is prohibitive, but there are ways to do it today using life insurance and some annuities. So I do want to clarify that point. But talking about taking care of themselves if they have to go into a nursing home, covering the cost. And one of the first things that people will say is, I don't want to be a burden to my kids. So I know it doesn't sound easy. I know people think, hey, I'm stretched really thin. But, if you have to get the latest iPhone upgrade every time one comes out, I'd be cautious about saying how you're stretched really thin.
Yeah, and that makes absolute sense. I just did a recent podcast on I'm never going to retire. And the idea behind that is not that I'm never going to stop working. The idea is mentally, I'm always going to be planning for the future. And I want to enjoy each day along the way. And I want to make sure that I provide for future Jake. And I had a conversation with another guest on the podcast about taking care of future Jake, and that saving is actually being nice to that future Jake. So I wanted to swing this around, and I wanted to ask you a specific question about future Jake here, a conversation that has been revolving around a lot of us in the modern leadership community are small business owners, we're entrepreneurs, we're at that stage and age in life where we're taking some financial risks, hoping that the reward and the return in the future will be greater, will be better, will provide the lifestyle that we feel like we have the potential and the passion to go after. Here's the question. Let's say you have an individual that has worked 20 years or 25 years or 15 years, and they've done it the traditional way. They've gone to work at a company. They have a 401k matching program, and they've put into that, and they've got their matching. Now they're in a situation where they're starting or running their own business or a small business. Is the IRA, is the retirement fund a good option for elongating the runway that an individual would have in running a small business? Does that make sense? Did I ask the question properly?
Yeah, your question makes complete sense. And, I'm a big fan of a lot of the entrepreneurship podcasts. That's kind of just sprung up in the past 5 years. Very, very big focus on entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur myself, so I totally get it. You hear this a lot. You hear people say, I cashed out my 401k and put it into my business. I think we tend to only hear the success stories. Those are the ones that get to go on the very popular entrepreneurial podcasts and talk about their big successes. But what you don't hear are the data points from those who cashed out their 401k and only had to pay the taxes and the penalties, and maybe the business fizzled and didn't work out the way they had hoped. Look, I get it. If you leave a job after several years and you have, 150 grand sitting there in your 401k and you want to start your lifestyle independent business and sit on the beach in Thailand or something and work from your computer, the cliche that we all hear. Tough one. I mean, you hear me sighing there because I get it. You want some kind of startup capital to make this happen, and you have that pile of cash sitting right there. No, as a fiduciary, I cannot advise it. I absolutely cannot. I think it's a terrible idea. Now, I know people are going to keep doing it. I know that because and I get it because, like I said, I'm an entrepreneur myself, and we all are so optimistic, and we all feel like, hey, this idea I have, this is going to net me so much more than that $150,000 I'm cashing out, which I won't really get because I'm paying penalties anyway. But I just have to say no. Find some other way of financing your startup. I don't know if you're a fan of Dan Miller and his 48 Days podcast, but Dan always has a really good metaphor that he uses, kind of getting close to the dock. So in other words, what that means is, work at the job, maybe stop stashing money away in your 401k for a year. Maybe do that. That to me would be a better alternative than taking penalties and paying big taxes when you withdraw at 35 as opposed to waiting to 59 and a half when you're allowed to. There are ways to do it. There are ways to do it to finance the entrepreneurial dream, but it's not necessarily as instant gratification as people may want.
Yeah, and there is some risk that we need to talk about, and that's what you're mentioning. And one of the things that jumped out to me is this goes back to the concept of emotional decision making. And one of the things that your firm is founded upon is taking the emotion out and making these scientific, strategic decisions based on historical lessons learned. And that's how I heard your answer about this taking money out of your 401k to fund your business. Is that is an emotional decision that is not based on historical trends, historical financial models, and so on and so forth. Now, I wanted to ask you if you don't mind elaborating just a little bit more on this get your boat close to the dock metaphor.
Yeah, that's something I've heard Dan Miller talk about a few times, not recently, to be honest. I think that goes back a few years, but the idea is you want to start a business, and look, I get it. I've been there. Many of us have been there. You're at a job, and you're just thinking, I hate this place. I can't wait to get out of here. I can hardly get out of bed in the morning to get myself here. So I understand that. Is the temptation is I'm quitting today. I'm doing whatever is necessary. I'm getting out of here. And, in many cases, sure, if there's something unusually horrifying that you have to quit immediately, maybe. But most of the time, you can sort of make a plan and figure out how maybe start your business at home on the side, continue working a day job. Maybe you really do need to quit your existing job, but get another day job while you start your dream business on the side. So that's really what that means. And then as you're kind of getting closer, the boat being the financing, the money you're getting from your job, as you get closer to the dock is this wonderful resort you're dreaming of, the business you want to start. As you get closer, and then you can step off the boat onto the dock more easily without risking falling in the water and flailing around and getting into trouble.
I love it. Thank you for going into that, because that is a great analogy, metaphor for us to think about with this. In the time that we have left, a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. Common concerns you hear about financial planning in certain generations. And with the time we have, I think I'd like to just focus on Gen X and baby boomers, because that's mostly the audience listening here would be Gen X and baby boomers. What are some of the common concerns you hear about financial planning in each of those two generational categories?
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the boomers, just because they are a little older. And I think a lot of us have seen the statistics. I don't really have anything at my fingertips right now, but just Google and you'll find hundreds of articles about how the boomers have not saved enough for retirement.
Right.
And I would really caution people listening to this to kind of, and I alluded to this a few minutes ago, Jake, that whole idea of the cop out of I'm not paid enough, my expenses are high, I'm putting my kids through college, how can I save for me? You know what? It's very much like when you get on an airplane and what does the flight attendant say? Should there be a change in cabin pressure, you want to put on your own mask before that of a child you are traveling with. And the reason is, if you're incapacitated, you can't help that child or anybody else. So it's really the same thing with retirement. And one problem the boomers have had is they've sacrificed their own retirement to pay for their kids' college. And I get that. It's something that people want to do. It's very important to them. But again, you have to think, if you're having fewer perhaps years in the workforce ahead of you, you have to take care of you because your child has a whole lot more years to start saving, take care of him or herself. And so that's a big thing we see among the boomers. We also see people maybe with too much house. That's a big problem. Maybe a couple or a single person who's rattling around in some house with square footage that they just don't need and a mortgage that's way out of whack with their income. So I think it's just for the boomer generation, it's really start thinking. And if you're still working, it's not too late. Something is better than nothing. Social Security, I think it's going to be there for you. There's no reason to think, there really isn't, that Social Security is going to go away for the boomer generation. We get asked that all the time. And there's no reason to think that Congress, because that's who does control the purse strings of Social Security. There's no reason to think that Congress would pull the plug on the boomers because they want to get voted in. And a surefire way to have senior citizens with pitchforks at your office is to pull the plug on Social Security.
And I think that's huge. I appreciate you bringing that up because that is something that we all need to recognize. The reality behind that, this is political, it's emotional, but the reality is that they're going to find a way, most likely going to have to find a way in order to stay elected office.
That's right. That's right. Now, for the millennials, it could be different. And I would not even go as far to say for the millennials that Social Security would go away. It could be reduced, but again, I mean, all of this data, it's all very public information about the trust fund. If people really want to know about Social Security, there's an author called Lawrence Kotlikoff. He's a consultant to our firm, and he's done some great writing on this topic. Now, for Gen Xers, they're actually still really in their peak earning years, being maybe in their 40s and 50s right now. I would just say really the same thing. Is put away money for yourself before your kid's college education. And I know that sounds selfish. It sounds horrible. People are recoiling. People are saying, I can't do that. I have to take care of my kids. Well, just flash forward then a few decades. And do you want to be that proverbial 85-year-old I keep bringing up who's moving in with your kids because you paid for their college but didn't save for yourself? So the younger you are, the more time, of course, you have to save, salt money away. Just, it really is. It is a selfish thing, but you have to take care of yourself. Who else is going to do it? Let's be honest.
Well, and it goes back to your analogy with the airplane, right? In order for you to save the child sitting next to you, you need to be conscious. You need to be safe yourself. And that, I love what you're talking about here. It really rings true and home to me because as I think about my kids and they're still young, they're still 11 is my oldest. So I still have lots of college ahead of me, but to think about preparing myself so that I can take care of them, yes, but also so that I make sure that I'm not a burden on them later on in my life. So Kate, I really appreciate that. I look at our time and we're running just a little bit short. I wanted to run through a few questions, get to know you a little bit better, a section I call Learning from Leaders. Can we jump into that now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. How about the current book on your Kindle or bedside table?
Okay, this is one that I got from a guy named Sean McCabe. He has a company called Sean West. Really interesting podcast. I was turned on to SeanWest.com a few months ago by Christy Hostler, who edits my podcast. And Sean recommended a book by a guy named Scott Burkham, Berkum, and it's called Confessions of a Public Speaker. It's both funny and informative and an easy read. And if you do any kind of public speaking, I think it's well worth it.
And if you're not doing any public speaking, get on the public speaking wagon because it is the future. Like working from home, being able to stand up in front of a group and deliver your expertise is going to be this job security of the future. So excellent book recommendation. How about the best movie ever made?
You know, I'm from the East Coast, and can I only give you two? Because there's two that these kind of go back to childhood, adolescence, just two that stuck with me, both New York City movies. Annie Hall, Woody Allen. This is kind of, before Woody Allen got kind of kooky and did some questionable things, but I do like that movie, Annie Hall. And then the other one, you're going to laugh, but I think it's a very misunderstood movie, Saturday Night Fever. It's a great coming of age story. Everybody thinks, the disco ball, John Travolta in the white suit. Yeah, but that was not what the story was about. So I would say those two movies I have enjoyed over and over again.
Well, and I love that we get some throwbacks and an ability to go back and see some. That's great. How about your leadership superpower?
I'm just willing to work hard. That's really it. I don't have a problem with putting the time in, and that's pretty unfashionable to say that. I'm really annoyed by this work smarter, not harder. I don't really know what that means. To me, that is kind of a cop-out, actually. It's a little bit of a way of, to me, it can cloak some laziness or unwilling to work. And when you are an entrepreneur, I'm sorry, even as much as we automate things and we put in systems, which you're absolutely right, you have to do it. Delegating is key, outsourcing is key, but nonetheless, this whole myth, and we all know it's a myth at this point. It was a catchy book title, but there is no 4-hour work week. It was a catchy book title.
It was a catchy book title, but the days of sitting on the beach in Thailand are not in your future. We have got to work hard. It's absolutely right. You have to earn your success. You can't just automate it and systematize it. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra?
Yeah, there's a quote that I always like, and actually two different people said it in kind of different ways, Theodore Roosevelt and Arthur Ashe, and I'm going to kind of butcher it a little bit, but it's basically start where you are with what you have. So in other words, don't wait for the right time for all the stars to align and everything to be perfect. Whatever resources you have, if it is a laptop and a phone, go for it. If it's the ability to raise some cash by taking a job as a barista for a few months, go for it. Start where you are with what you have.
I love that. How about if you could leave one leadership trait to your kids or the next generation, what would it be?
Yeah, one. That is so difficult. I think it does again come back to this willingness to hustle. I think I got that term originally a few years ago from John Acuff, who's a great writer, really admire him. And he sort of introduced me to this concept of hustle. And Gary Vaynerchuk, certainly. There are a lot of people out there. No, I'm not advocating these 18-hour work days the way that Gary Vaynerchuk does. If it works for him, that's fantastic. I don't think that works for everybody. You need some downtime. But again, if you have goals that you want to achieve, you just got to go out and do it. And you can't just dream about it and think about it and believe that it will magically all manifest. Doesn't work that way.
How about best book ever written?
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one for me. So, Jake, I'm going to answer that in terms of the best business book. And that answer could change on any day you ask me, to be honest, because I do read a whole lot, taken a lot of information. But one book that I've reread over and over again, it's flawed, but it's Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I know the title is sort of off-putting to people who have never read it, but it really is just a good sort of primer for human relations, how to respect people, how to talk to people in ways that engage them and address what's important to them. And it's a really easy read. So that is one that I would recommend for the listeners.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a tremendous book. And the title is, in current parlance, a little off-putting. But if you read the book, you realize what he's saying is be friends, serve, and help other people, offer value. And you can have it's like Zig Ziglar said, you can have everything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want. That's really what Dale Carnegie says in How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, it really is. The title makes it sound like it's all manipulative, but that's not what it's about.
Well, Kate, we had a great time. I appreciate all the wisdom and the lessons of finance that you've brought to us. Before we let you go today, can you take a minute, share a bit of advice with us, and then take a minute, share with us how we can connect with you or learn more about better money decisions?
Yeah, I think just in light of the conversation we've had today, take care of yourself going forward. Don't buy into the whole notion of there's nothing I can do, the world is falling apart, everything is so expensive. Just keep in mind, do you really need the latest iPhone the minute it comes out, or can you stash that money away in a retirement account, and not just one time? I mean, do that over and over and over again every paycheck. Or if you're an entrepreneur, set aside some money when you get paid and just do this. Think of yourself first, because ultimately that is how you're going to think about your family, because you're not going to be, when you're 85, you're not going to be showing up at your 55-year-old daughter's doorstep saying, feed me. So that's one thing. And in terms of getting in touch with me, my podcast is called America Talks Money, and the website is bettermoneydecisions.com. And we also have a blog with a whole lot of content at betterfinancialdecisions.com.
Well, wonderful, Kate. I will link all of those up on the show notes for this episode. Again, thank you for all the financial wisdom that you brought to us. I feel like we are better prepared going forward. Thanks for giving us of your time and your wisdom.
All right. Thanks, Jake. This has been fun.
Thank you again, Kate. As many of you know, I have a background in stocks and investing. I eat this stuff up. I even dreamed for a brief, confused moment in college about pursuing an investment career on Wall Street. Thank goodness for spouses and their guiding influence, because I think I like podcasting much better at this stage of my life. A couple of big takeaways from today's podcast. Of course, take care of yourself going forward. It's that airplane analogy, right? The plane's not going to crash. We're doing fine. But in case of a change of cabin pressure, make sure that you put on your mask before securing the mask of those around you. And that's the same with our finances. We're not going to crash and burn. We've got this. We're moving in the right direction. You and I, we've planned, we've prepared, we're moving in the right direction. But if there's a change in cabin pressure, you make sure that you take care of yourself, and then you reach out and help those around you. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is this idea of finding opportunities, defining your industry and your market in a way that hasn't been defined before. I love talking with Kate about her working from home and working remotely, because it really shows that no matter what your career and industry are, look for those opportunities to reach outside what you commonly think of as traditional. Do something a little different. And you know what? You may just find your niche along the way. I want to leave you with this challenge. If you do not have a financial plan, either in your head or on some spreadsheet or pile of papers, start the process of planning for your future. Because like the Cheshire Cat in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, any road can take you there. Meaning, if you got no plan, you get nowhere. And I don't want that. Start putting a plan in place. Of course, all things that we discussed in this episode can be found easily on the show notes for this episode over at jakeacarlson.com/ML27 for episode 27. And you can find everything over there, the books, the quotes, the movies, and all of the wisdom shared by Kate. While you're there, make sure to take that free leadership superpower assessment. Free the leader in you. Until then, my friends, have a great day, make a great life, and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.